Hey, I'm Chey, and welcome to this month's reading wrap-up. Ready? Rollin'. I'm not gonna waste time, I'm gonna get right on into this. This was a pretty good month for reading, especially considering last month, where I feel like I didn't really read anything. I think I only read like 5 books last month. But this month, I read 11 books. Mostly, it was thanks in part to a challenge I did where I read for 24 hours consecutively. Or not consecutively, collectively. I read for 24 hours collectively. The whole point was not to do it consecutively because that's too much. But I read for 24 hours collectively over a course of days, and I ended up reading literally just 8 pages shy of 3,000 pages. 2,992 pages, in simple terms. Thank you, Chey. That being as it is, that is the period where I read most of these books. Now, unfortunately, I don't have every single book here to show you because one is a friend's copy, one was a library copy, and the other was an audiobook. But I will show you what I do own, which is 8 out of the 11. All 8 chonkers right here. 2 are manga, 1 is a giant classic, and the other are just a hodgepodge. We'll get into it. Also, interspersed throughout this video, you are going to see clips of me from my vlog. 98% clips that did not make it into the vlog because I felt like they were better put into the review video, frankly, because I didn't want my summaries of the books and my feelings in that video to go on for too long because I knew that video was already going to be long enough. The books were still fresh in my mind, and so I was able to articulate my thoughts on them in a much clearer and much coherent way than I probably can just sitting here rattling off, because if y'all don't know, I don't script these videos. I literally just set my phone, set my light up, and I just start rambling. I just start talking. It's probably obvious. The audiobook that I read / listened to this month was Death Overdue by Alison Brooks. This is a cozy mystery that takes place, if you can guess it, in a library. I picked this up on a whim just because I'm trying to get more into listening to audiobooks. I'm trying to train my brain to be able to listen to it and retain information, because usually audiobooks I just don't pay attention. I just get distracted and then I forget what I was listening to. But something like a cozy mystery I figured was perfect, because not only am I reading, but also it's just enough information to where if I totally zone out for like 30 seconds, I can quickly pick back up on the information. Now, my opinion of this book differs from my opinion of the experience of this book. I'm glad that I read this because I did enjoy it. It was fun. I listened to it mostly while I was playing a game on my iPad, or while I was editing, while I was drawing, while I was doing other things. And for that, I think it was perfect. It was entertaining enough for that. It was fun. It was engaging. It was short. Well, at least in my opinion, it was short. I think it was like 9 hours, and I listened on almost triple speed, so. The thing about this book that does irritate me is the main character. Did not really like the main character. She got on my nerves. I didn't really have a bad opinion of this main character in the beginning. But then when it came to a certain dude that she was kind of starting to see, kind of starting to date, which, by the way, she met him and teamed up with him in the beginning to try and help him solve his mom's murder, so poor boy has already been traumatized in his life very deeply. Do you know what she said? Do you know her reason for wanting to break it off, for not wanting to date him? If she was like, you know what, we're just not compatible, or like, this is not the right circumstances for this sort of match, fine. It was the way she went about it where she was like, you know what, this traumatic event happened to him when he was a child, therefore he is emotionally stunted in his growth and he is never going to grow up and get past it, so emotionally he is stuck as a child. And I don't want that. When she has basically no evidence for that, her only 2 cases of that are when there's like a certain interaction, I even forget what it was, that's how inconsequential it was, but basically he didn't understand like a certain kind of social cue or a certain like hint someone was trying to make when they were talking about something. That's literally it. And she's like, you know what? He's never gonna grow up. Emotionally, a child. That rubbed me the wrong way, but then she's just judgy, like she's too good. She works in a library, and yet she's too good to shelve books. And she's also constantly judging her coworkers, like being prissy or like uptight. Ma'am, don't you have better things to do? Also, this may be just a me thing, but she basically falls in love with her landlord after seeing him once. They were childhood buds, as in they interacted somewhat in their childhood. He was a close friend of, I think it was her brother, like whenever they came to that town, but they didn't stay in that town like super long. Anyway, she barely knows this guy, but she ends up staying in a house that he inherited, so now he's renting it out as a landlord. She sees him one time and she's like, and she looks at this other guy, the childish man, and she's like, you know what? think I want to be with Dylan instead. It's like, homegirl. Homegirl. You just met this man. You send him his mail for him when he's out of town. That's it. And then I went on the Goodreads comments, which I usually don't read because I usually don't agree with, but so many people were talking about that they also had the same problems with her being, like, judgy and just a bad attitude, and I was like, thank you, I'm not the only one that sees it. But there was one comment and someone says, it's real funny for a 30-year-old who self-proclaims she dresses as a goth, which she did early in the book, but she changes her style throughout the book, to be talking about other people like this and bringing them down. Homie, who hurt you? Her being 30 years old and dressing like a goth has nothing to do with this. You're insinuating her choice of style is something to be ridiculed for in conjunction with her bad attitude and her negative Nancy-ness. No, homie. All that does is just tell me that you are someone that would have bullied me in high school and you're probably not much fun at parties. If you're going to criticize the main character, even regardless of this character's attitude or whatever that bugs me, style choice, why does it matter? Why does it matter if she's goth, emo, alt, she's cottagecore? What? How does that enter into it? Listen, as someone who has had childish hobbies for a long time, specifically in the more creative endeavors, whenever someone insinuates that someone is childish because of something that they like that is not hurting them or anyone else, it just bugs me. There are better things to do with your day. This message is made all the more stronger that I am wearing one of the very first PewDiePie merch t-shirts that I got way back when I first started watching him. This was from his Cry of Fear series. That rant went on way too long. The book in itself, it was fine. I don't think I'm going to continue with the series, but it served its purpose. It served as a distraction. It served as a little brain distraction while I was doing other things. The other book that I read from the library was This Woven Kingdom. Overall, I really like this book, but I've read a lot of YA fantasy in my day, and I've talked about this in my vlog, but I was pretty sure I was going to be able to predict what was going to happen, and I did. Which is not an insult on the author's part, it's just that I have read so many YA fantasy books in my life that they all follow a very similar formula, and if you read a lot of those books, you know what I'm talking about. That doesn't mean it can't be a good story. Because this was a good story, and I'm excited to continue this series. I would say more so than the story, I really enjoy the writing style. I never read the Shatter Me series. I have no interest in reading it from what I know and from what I have seen so far in Emmy's vlog, which, if you don't watch Emmy, you should definitely check out. I'll link it somewhere because girl put her heart and soul into this vlog. She read the entire Shatter Me series. She out there doing the Lord's work. Bless her. I actually really liked the writing style of this book, and more even so than that, I loved the world building, the intricate world building and societal aspects of this world. I think that the way that the author was able to weave in both individual and societal complex conditions and how they can often act as a cycle, particularly in a particularly like the kingdom that they're in, which has a heavy, complicated history that has screwed up all of society. I think they do it very well. But I'm really enjoying the pacing of her character development, because it's not like she goes from being the servant girl that she was that was in hiding, like, oh my gosh, I have to keep my identity hidden, I have to stay low under the radar, to all of a sudden that now she's like, yeah, I'm a proud, like, ancestor of the Jin Kingdom. Like, no, she doesn't do, like, a 180 flop. Her development and how she feels, I believe, about herself and her situation is developing very realistically as she's exposed to new people, new ideas, and new perspectives. And even more so than that, they tackle the intricacies of the practical side of running a kingdom. The darker practical side, the kind of side where you're like, yeah, that makes a lot of practical sense, even though it's not maybe the noble thing to do. It's like, yeah, that makes sense. For instance, this is not going to be a spoiler, there's an issue of inheritance in the kingdom. Because the grandpa is king, the dad died in battle, and then there's the grandson, the prince-to-be. But he doesn't have an heir, so there's a question of, hey, when are you going to make an heir? And he's like, I'm not, interested in that, like, it'll happen when it comes. But the author's able to weave in the granddad talking about, hey, we're about to be in a war. You're going to need an heir. It's not just securing the family line, it's securing your status among the other noble families for them to have faith in you that this is going to continue. Because even more so than that, It's all about appearances to the rest of the country. Right now, it looks like we're on shaky ground, and the people that depend on us, even the lowest of the lower classes, and they depend on the noble families. And if the noble families don't have faith in us, if they don't have faith in the kingdom that it's going to continue, that we're a worthy investment, the people under them are going to suffer. So showing a strong face here will end up benefiting even the lowest of the classes, because... blah, blah, blah. Very well said, Chey. I can tell that you're a Georgetown graduate. But I think you get my point. Sure, high fantasy novels tackle this, and grimdark does. I think The Broken Empire does this pretty darn well. But in terms of YA fantasy, I don't think that I've ever read a YA fantasy author who's tackled those issues, or at least shed the view of practicality on it, but the way that they present it as a practical issue, rather than just being evil like,
no, you must produce air now, because I'm the big, grumpy, meanie grampy.
It's just nice. It's refreshing. All in all, excited to read the second book. My library doesn't have it, so I'm gonna wait till they get it, but I'm excited to see where this series goes. The Girl from the Other Side, Volume 1. This was the first book that I read in my 24-hour reading challenge, and I loved it. I don't think it's going to be one of my new all-time favorite series. I thought it was cozy, I thought it was mysterious. It balanced the... Basically what's happening is that there's a world where there's this sort of plague going on, where it turns people into monsters if you are so touched by one of the monsters. And now, all the remaining people are corralled into this town, and there's them, and then there's the others on the outside world. And there's this tiny little girl who is living on the outside, the other side, with this monster. They're trying to coexist, they're trying to survive, and this monster is trying to take care of her, all while trying not to touch her or have any interaction that could possibly harm her or do what happened to him to her. Their relationship is so sweet. But this book isn't just happy, jolly, fun times, because obviously there's some kind of plague going on. Isn't that the way of the world these days? As far as this book goes, setting the tone for the rest of the series, it does a really good job. It balances the moments of peace with moments of tension very well. I don't think you ever get too comfortable or too heightened in tension. The moments of peace are there so that when there are moments of tension, you feel the stark difference in those moments. And I actually found myself, not exaggerating, holding my breath at one point, being like, to flip the page. And the whole premise of the curse, and there's a local town that's hunting down the outsiders and trying to eradicate them to get rid of said curse spreading. And just that whole kind of premise reminds me of Nier with the black scrawl. Also, the fear of the little girl catching it, the fear of the little girl that might have it, supposedly has it. Very much reminiscent of Nier. I won't get further into it than that, but giving heavy Nier vibes, and Nier is my favorite video game of all time, my favorite video game franchise of all time. Love is War, Volume 1. Yes, I finally got around to reading it, and I loved it. This was a really quick read for me, even though it is a little bit thicker of a manga volume, especially for a first volume of a series I've ever seen. She's a little thick, but I love her. All my friends at me. Thick-headed, maybe. I thought this book was very sweet. I thought it was funny. I have seen the first season of the show, so a lot of it was familiar to me. I still think my favorite chapter is when she gets to walk to school for the first time by herself and she helps a lost child. Either that or when they're arguing about the mountains versus the beach. Because I am totally a mountains forest girl. I am all for that, even with the bugs. Something else special about this book is the celebration of mundanity. Well, how they turn mundanity into psychological emotional warfare. I think that's pretty neat. Anything can be emotional warfare. Movie tickets, lunchboxes, random trivia. Anything is fair game. All is fair in love and war. The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. I like this book. Did not like it as much as I hoped to, but I did enjoy it. Don't think I'm going to continue with the series, because I think it is a series, right? On Goodreads it says Cities #1. It's not that it was a bad book. It isn't. It's just a book that's not for me. Which is okay. It's clearly a book for plenty of other people. What wasn't for me about this book? I love the general idea and themes of this book. I love that certain places have a power all their own, that people have power, and that people living in those places often give that place its power, or at least bump it on up. As someone from the deep woods of Appalachia, someone who loves the land, I get it, I love it, I am so down for it, I am so there. And I think a place like New York City is a perfect setting for something like that. What wasn't for me? New York City. I rant about this in my vlog, so I'm not going to do it here, but it is a pretty funny rant, because it was just unhinged Chey. I like my trees, I like my birds, I like my bugs. Leave me in the grass. Leave me in the leaves. I'm happy there. I am just not a city girl. I am not a New York City girl. I'm just not a city girl. Nothing wrong with cities, but much like this book, they're just not for me. They're fun to visit. I don't want to stay. And this book is for people that love cities, especially New York City. This was written by a person that eats, sleeps, and breathes New York City in all its intricacies, which was amazing and very fun to read about, and I love the diverse cast of characters in this book. But the whole time I was reading this book, I just really felt like an outsider. And this is the metaphor I used in my video, but I felt like the friend that got invited to go to a concert with two friends who are obsessed with a band, and I only know 2 songs. I'm gonna have a fun time, probably, but I'm gonna be lost in the sauce. I would definitely recommend this book though, because it was a fun time. I did enjoy my time here. But a tourist is all I'll ever be. All the Crooked Saints by Maggie Stiefvater. Love this book. I want it to be its own series. I think it's a standalone. You think I would have checked on this by now. I haven't. I believe this is a standalone, but I would read the heck out of a series like this. It has all the writing chops that I loved from the Raven Boys. It has a lot of the similar themes that I love. Also talking about the power of land and the power of people. The mysteries of life and nature and people and our emotions and how they intertwine. All that good stuff. This book basically follows a family out west, and their whole thing is throughout their entire lineage, they have been able to grant miracles. Now, the catch is, granting a miracle is a 2-step process. So if you go to this family to be granted a miracle, they will bring your darkness forth. And in the second step is, they don't cure you of your darkness, you have to cure yourself of your darkness. And your darkness basically manifests itself in a physical form as like a physical riddle you have to solve. And then when you've solved it, you have your miracle and you're rid of your darkness. But the whole concept is fascinating to me. I thought it was so cool. I thought the characters were all unique and realistic, and I loved them. Especially the pilgrims, as they called them, that live with the family who are trying to solve their own darknesses. And though I said that I would love this to be a series, I think this book is the perfect length for what it is. I don't think that it carried on too long. I don't think that it was too short. I think it perfectly captured the essence of what this story needed to deliver. I think that, as Allison Pages will put it, it's a book that respects your time. Caroline Dooner, Tired AF. This book. This book is a nonfiction memoir that, as it says, talks about burnout at the hands of diet, self-help, and hustle culture. I'd say this book is a mesh of a memoir and advice book. I don't think it's really self-help, but it's more advice. The author just goes through her own experiences with it and what she's learned personally. Opinions about this book. It didn't give me any life-altering realizations, but it did give me a lot of perspective that often seems like common sense, but it doesn't really sink in until you hear it from another person. And also sometimes it's just nice to be able to hear someone speak their experience and be like, oh, I felt that too, and know you're not alone. This book is really great for that. Not only that, the author also has PCOS, which I have too. So reading about her experiences with that really hit home for me and really dug in deep. Something else I think the author does well, I think the author is very self-aware. So a premise of this book is that she took 2 years off to rest. Like, stop hustling, stop grinding. She took 2 years off to just rest as much as she could. That doesn't mean that she did nothing, but rather she just wasn't trying to burn the candle at both ends. She was trying to rest her mind. I think her general observations on our society, I think her general observations on everything, I pretty much agree with. I think they're great. but she realizes that she was in a very lucky position to be able to do what she was doing, taking the 2 years to rest as much as she could. And that's a theme that pervades this book. She does recognize her privilege, if you want to put it that way. She mentions many times that I know that I'm in a privileged position to be able to do X, Y, or Z a certain way. And then she lists some alternatives for people's different circumstances, whether economical or just physical or mental. And I think that's nice. I think finding an author that is not only aware of those differences, but also tries to make a point of addressing them and providing the same kind of help that they would otherwise to what they would consider their own norm is nice. She also had a lot of great further reading in here about subjects that I've been interested in for a while. So thanks for adding to my TBR, Caroline. But it's good. It's nonfiction. It's learning. I'm not going to complain about it. A history nerd complaining about nonfiction? Someone called the FBI. A priest? Is it blasphemous? I don't know. Bare Necessities. This book was really good. This book was heart-wrenching. This book was heartwarming. It was funny. It was sweet. I adored every single minute of it. A book that respects your time. What's it about? Well, to put it in simple terms, there's a family. The mom unfortunately passes away in a car accident, and ever since then the son has become selectively mute. The dad is of course struggling financially with the loss of half the income, trying to help his son and grieve himself. He unfortunately loses his job and faces eviction and also broken kneecaps. Not gonna explain that one further. Context clues. So what does he do after losing his job? Well, he tries to find another job for a while, but after hitting the bricks a little too often, he goes to the park and sees a bunch of street performers just raking it in. So he decides with some of his last money to go buy a panda bear outfit and become a street performer. Not only that, but he ends up saving his son while dressed as the panda bear from some bullies, and his son starts talking to him. His son does not know it's him, of course. And later on, his son continues coming to this park and opening up further and further to this mysterious panda bear that never talks back. This book does well in dealing with the many ways that people grieve, the many ways that people connect. I felt Danny, the dad's grief palpably. I think for anyone that's ever had to grieve someone that they love dearly, not depressingly so, but this book delves well into the intricacies of that, like little things that you miss about them that people often take for granted, things that trigger certain emotions of grief, and the many ways that people can come together to deal with those feelings of grief. And just the many ways that love can be shown. Not only romantically, but platonically, just in a stranger's act of kindness. So don't think that this book is, a crying fest. I laughed more than I was sad. This book is very funny. But if you want something that'll tug at your heartstrings, but also make you do a chuckle, I recommend this. It's also pretty short. Well, I take that back. It's about 300 pages, but it flew by. The Absence of Sparrows. This book was good. It wasn't great. But that's not the fault of the book. I just think I'm a little bit old for it. It's a YA middle grade fantasy mystery kind of sci-fi. Basically, people suddenly start turning to glass statues randomly. A dark cloud shows up, a dude turns to a glass statue, and everyone's like, uh-oh. And then it starts happening across the country, across the world. These dark storms roll in, and people start turning to glass statues with no rhyme or reason why or how. It's an apocalypse. It's a glass apocalypse. Statue apocalypse. Mannequin apocalypse? Markiplier's worst nightmare. I bet you're wondering what sparrows have to do with it. Well, our main character, who is, I think he's 11? 10 to 12 years old. He's a young boy. He loves birds. Birds are his thing. He loves birding with his mom. His mom is an avid bird watcher, bird researcher, bird enthusiast. And he notices that once this apocalypse starts happening, that a flock of sparrows has gone missing. And he thinks that the sparrows are the key to not only unlocking what's going on, but also fixing everything. Like I said, it was good. It was fun. I did predict how it was going to end or what was happening, but the author hooked me in such a way that I was doubting myself along the way. I was going, I think this is what's going to happen, but I'm also hoping that that's not what's going to happen. The author was giving me enough to be like, oh, it's possible that this thing could happen, that the other alternative could happen, so I'm going to keep reading to find out. And also the ending hit me like a gut punch. Just Punched me in all my organs. I forgot the Kite Runner. What did I do with the Kite Runner? I think my mom has the Kite Runner. What I love most about this book, and I said this in my vlog, and I promised to deliver on some quotations, that is what I am doing now. The way this author talks about nature and its power, whether it be through specific animals, you know, individual animals and their abilities, or natural phenomenon like thunderstorms, really struck a chord with me. And the way that the author was able to correlate it with humans, as I've said before, I love connecting people to places and the power that they give to each other and the power that they can have. The way that it was presented in this book, I really enjoyed. Because, and this is probably the most hippie thing you will ever hear me say, I truly do believe that we're all connected. Everything's connected. Everything can be connected. Okay, quotes. Quotes like, Dad used to say you had to be careful about who and what you believed, because unlike blue jays, who only have one disguise, and who only ever seem to lie for just one purpose, humans wear lots of masks and tell all sorts of crazy stories for all sorts of crazy reasons, some of which might not even make a lick of sense. I thought it amazing how nature sometimes made the best toys. Amen. The cruelty of birds might be an illusion, but the kind that lives in the hearts of boys like Lester and Lars is very real indeed, no matter its true root cause. And then this last one isn't about nature, but it's just something that I really relate to, especially having ADHD. He's talking about his brother, and he says, Pete also liked to tap his feet and crack his knuckles. I don't think he could even help it. His basic wiring just didn't allow for him to keep still, unless, of course, he had a radio pressed to his ear. ADHD music freak like I am? That's just relatable content to me. That was me as a kid, that's me now. I can't sit still unless I'm listening to music. And even then, I mostly don't sit still. I'm mostly moving and grooving. My mom has the Kite Runner. Confirmed. Okay, well, I'll make the summary of the Kite Runner really short, quick, and to the point, unlike everything else I have ever done. I really enjoyed this book. I see why it's a classic. Content warnings abound. My goodness, please check the content warnings before you read this book, because I figured going into it that it was going to have a lot of discussion surrounding racism, war, gore, abuse, things of that nature, but I got slapped in the face with some heavy content. Luckily, I am able to handle content like that, so I was able to just push through and keep reading, but if you don't know about that content ahead of time and you're sensitive to that kind of subject, so please check the content warnings before you read this book. That being said, if you can handle that kind of content, I definitely recommend this book as a must-read. I was intimidated by it initially. I don't know why. I think just because of the legend that precedes this book, but to me, I think it was accessible. I took my time in reading it, but I still flew through it. The story was engaging, the plot was paced well. It tugged at my heartstrings, but also made me think. I really enjoyed this book. I really love this author's writing style and the way they can build a world and just engage a reader. I have another book by this author. I think it's And the Mountains Echoed. I think I took it to my other house. But I'm excited to read that one too. Okay, we're down to the last two books, and I saved my favorite two for last. Let's go over the big chunky boy first. The Three Musketeers by Dumas. I tried to do Star Wars and ended up with marriage. That's gotta be an accurate quote for somebody out there. Anyway, Three Musketeers. This was my favorite book in middle school. And that's all you need to know about middle school, Chey. Yes, I was one of those annoyingly advanced reader level kids in school. Because of my advanced reading level, my librarian literally let me into the higher levels of our school library. We went to a K through 12 school, so we had everything. And my mom was like, you know what? You should read some classics. 5th grade Chey. And I was like, well, what sounds interesting? This does. Men with swords. Men with swords fighting around and being French. Let me read that. This looks like a chunky, intimidating boy. The copy I read was probably like half this size, but I not only read it, I devoured that thing. I loved it. I remember thinking that it was hilarious. I remember Athos being my absolute favorite, one of my favorite characters of all time at the time. He was my favorite musketeer, hands down. But the last time that I read this book was in middle school. And I thought, it's been my favorite for a long time, so much so that I bought this edition a couple years ago because it has this hilarious comic about D'Artagnan showing up to a fight, to a duel, but he forgets who he's supposed to be fighting, and so he doesn't know who to look for. Which is a very apt comic for this book. I bought this edition a couple years ago, and recently I thought, you know what? It's time to reread this. It's time to see if it is still one of my favorite books of all time. Because, you grow up, your tastes change, your perspectives changes, and I just wondered if it was still as funny, if it was still as amazing as I remembered it to be. And I also wondered if Athos would still be my favorite musketeer. The answer to all those questions, yes. This book is hilarious. Still my favorite book, probably of all time. If not the singular book, it's still up there in my favorite books of all time. I'm still crazy about this. I love the story. I love the writing. The prose is so beautiful and yet understandable. If you're looking for an accessible classic, please do not let this length of this book intimidate you. Try it. I'm not saying you're gonna love it, but try it. Do not be intimidated. I think as far as classics go, this is one of the more accessible classics. Athos is still my favorite musketeer. He's got a mysterious backstory. He's a grumpykin sometimes, but he's also very funny and has a soft spot for the people he cares about. Running theme for the men and characters in general that I'm attracted to in my life. I think this story is engaging. All the characters are unique, and if you can get past some historical info dumping, I think that you would really enjoy this. You don't have to understand French history to read this book. You don't. I don't. I never have. And I'm a history major from Georgetown. I understand the basics of history. I'm like, yes, I know that France had kings and, even though this is before the What I'm saying is, you don't have to have a history degree to be able to read this book. You don't have to know anything about French history, except maybe that France was a country and had kings. Everything is pretty darn well explained. I annotated the ever-loving heck out of this book. The red tabs, the giant red tabs you ask, that's every time D'Artagnan starts a fight. D'Artagnan is our main character, and he has an affliction I like to call fight me syndrome, where anyone who has slighted him in any of the slightest ways, he turns around, pulls out his sword, and he's like, fight me? So every time you see one of these giant red tabs, that's a fight me. The musketeer took 2 steps forward and moved D'Artagnan out of the way with his hand. D'Artagnan leapt back and drew his sword. Just for being like... He was like... But I also cannot overstate to you how beautiful the prose is in this book, and how absolutely hysterical it is. For example, one of my favorite lines of prose. Aramis shot D'Artagnan one of those glances which makes a man understand that he has just acquired a mortal enemy. Then, casting a lasting glance at the handsome young man who was barely 25 years old, and whom he left lying there, insensible and perhaps dead, he heaved a sigh over the strange destiny that leads men to destroy each other for the interest of people who are strangers to them, and who often do not even know that they exist. D'Artagnan wondered at the fragile and unknown threads from which the fates of nations and the lives of men are sometimes hung. Besides, she sensed, as one senses an approaching storm, that the outcome was near and could not fail to be terrible. And then, here's the humor. Cheer up, imbecile, it's simply a little outing. Oh yes, like our pleasure trip the other day, where it rained bullets and sprouted snares. Porthos, said Aramis, Athos has already informed you that you are a ninny, and I concur with his opinion. I don't understand why you even bought 3 horses. In fact, I only bought 2, said Aramis. So the third fell on you from the sky? As you can see by my annotation, that was said by Athos, who's my favorite of all time. One of my favorite lines I think I've ever read in literature, though, is this. As for the 4th, Porthos, he's a fool, a fop, and a ninny, and not even worth bothering with. Bars. A fly has joined me. Do you also want to read The Three Musketeers? I had a lot of fun annotating this book, rereading this book. I think I'm going to try and do, probably not a yearly reread of it, but a reread every few years. Lastly, we have Volume 1 of Dai Dark. This is quickly becoming one of my favorite manga series, which is not very surprising because the author of this series wrote one of my favorite manga series of all time, Dorohedoro, and this is their newer series. Everything about this series, the art style, the setting, the characters, the lore that we're building, the intrigue that we're building, the plot that really ramped up towards the end of this, and now I'm desperate to get the second volume. This story follows our main character, Zaha Sanko, and he basically has a curse, I guess if you want to call it, where whoever possesses his bones gets to have any wish granted to them. So as you can imagine, people are constantly trying to kill him to get his bones. So basically every day of this dude's life, every time he sees someone or meets someone, he's gotta be thinking like,
tell me you don't want to chew my bones!
I adore this book with all of my heart and soul. I am loving every second of this series, and I can't wait to continue it. Also, I simp for death, not gonna lie. Okay, that's it. We've been here long enough. What did you read this month? Did you find any new favorites? Did you find some new, hated books? Did you find any that you hated? Did you find any that you thought you were gonna love, but then you only liked? I'm curious, let me know down in the comments. Also, if you're hungry for more book videos, I have a whole playlist full of my vlogs, challenges, wrap-ups, reviews, all that good stuff. I'll link it up in the cards and in the description. Check it out if you're interested. As for right now, though, that's gonna be it for me. Thank y'all so much for watching. If you ain't heard it from anyone else today, I love you. Love and peace.